To those of us who are gathered here today, we are a very diverse group of people. Let's look around. We are all from different cultural backgrounds, different countries of origin, different races. But what binds us together is our baptism in Jesus. Whatever our differences may be, social, political, whatever language we speak, whatever culture we're from, we all say together, we believe in Jesus. And his way is our way. Our basic identity is that we are a community of Jesus' followers, and we love him. We've been listening to pieces of the Sermon on the Mount now for the last 2 weeks, today and next weekend. But doesn't hearing the Sermon on the Mount these Sundays kind of leave you feeling a little discouraged? How can we ever live up to all these teachings? How will we ever even know how to live up to them? When we hear Jesus' sermon, what St. Paul tells us in his letter to the Corinthians today, that's very true. We are called to live, St. Paul says, not according to the wisdom of today, but according to God's wisdom. And that wisdom, Paul reminds us, has been revealed to us in the life of Jesus through his Spirit. It is through the gift of the Holy Spirit that we have come to accept Jesus as God's full revelation in the flesh. We need to remind ourselves today that that same Spirit makes it possible for all of us to live according to Jesus' teaching. These are not new commandments, folks. Jesus isn't giving us stricter, higher codes of ethics. That is not what makes his teaching so special. Rather, through our baptism and the gift of his Spirit, we have the desire and the divine power to live what we are being taught again today. That new Spirit in us enables us to live just as Jesus tells us, with a holiness that surpasses even that of the scribes and Pharisees. You know, the Pharisees spent a lot of time and energy fulfilling the law. They were the middle class of their time, unlike the desperately poor who comprised most of Jesus' followers. The Pharisees had an education. They had leisure time to pursue the fullness of observance. So what chance did the illiterate, overworked, and often burdened followers of Jesus have? For that matter, what chance do we have in fulfilling those teachings? And yet, Jesus calls all of us to surpass the scribes and Pharisees. And from today's gospel selection, we hear that Jesus wants to cut short, at its inception, a path that may lead to violence and away from good relationships. So he says, you disciples, you're supposed to control even your anger. Also, in cases of adultery, families would seek retaliation on the couple and on whole families because of the shame that it brought down on those families. And so, to prevent adultery and the subsequent bloodshed that would erupt, Jesus tells his disciples, hey, you, don't even think about such a thing. We're going to have no lusting around here. In addition, for good community relations, especially among believers, would be possible only if people behave honestly with one another, if they trust each other's words. So, you disciples, there be no lying. Jesus calls his disciples to be examples of model behavior. Such ways of being with one another, besides forming loving relationships in the community, also draws attention to that community, and therefore to the teachings of the one that community follows. Today, Jesus gave us some really concrete examples of what we have heard him talk to his disciples in these last weeks. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a mountain. We Christians are called to a different way of living in our behavior to each other and then to the whole world. We must seek reconciliation where there is anger and alienation. We must tame our desires, despite what the world is like around us. We must be faithful to one another so that when we make promises, we keep them. What will help us live the challenges that Jesus places before us? Most certainly, we cannot do it merely by gritting our teeth or white-knuckling or putting our nose to the grindstone. Instead, we fix our eyes on Jesus, and then we turn to each other in mutual love. Does that sound idealistic? Yeah, a little bit. But Jesus wouldn't ask us to fulfill something that he himself wouldn't accomplish. Jesus' life showed us what the Sermon of the Mount looks like when it's alive and right in front of us. He is our wise teacher who shows us the way to life and gives us his Spirit to help us choose his life-giving ways. He teaches us the ways that will help us choose life instead of death. We, his disciples, are to continue putting flesh on the Sermon of the Mount in the way that we live. Whatever our circumstances, people who may never read or never hear the Sermon on the Mount, they should still be able to learn its content by looking at us.